Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to our audience who are joining us from different parts of the world on this Zoom webinar and our Facebook live stream. And Happy New Year 2023 to all of you. I hope you had a great holiday. And today's webinar is the first one to kickstart our 2023, organized by the Center for Khmer Study. And as always, it is recorded and live streamed on our Facebook page. My name is Samdi, the Deputy Director of the Center for Khmer Study. For those who have just joined us for the first time today, CKS is a non-profit and non-governmental organization working to promote research, teaching, and public service in social sciences, art, humanity in Cambodia and the Mekong region. Our headquarters is located in Wat Nam in Siem Reap, where you can access to our library resources for free, and our second office is in Phnom Penh. The presentation today focuses on grounding the green city in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, being presented by our French dissertation research fellow, Dorothée Berthet. We have our first special guest from Singapore University of Technology and Design, Dr. Samuel Jong, who will be our moderator today. And now I would like to hand over the floor to Dr. Jong, who will introduce more about our speaker and the structure of the webinar. Dr. Jong, the floor is yours, and please kindly introduce yourself to our audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I believe it's a good start to the year to start on such an interesting topic that we have today. A little about myself first, even though I'm not the presenter today. I'm Samuel Chung. I am a research fellow and I lead the Urban Psychology Lab in the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. So we are a research institution and we do a range of research connected to urban issues, and we are very much also involved in research within the Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so a little introduction of our speaker today. We have Valerie Petrie. I hope I got the name right. She's currently a PhD candidate and also a teaching assistant at the Institute of Environmental Governance and Territorial Development at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. So she has been there since September 2019, just before the pandemic. So from prior to her starting on the PhD, she was a junior expert in urban planning for the Paris Urbanism Agency as part of the decentralized cooperation between the municipality of Phnom Penh and also the city of Paris. So her research focuses on urban dynamics and new mechanisms of city production in Southeast Asia and in particular Phnom Penh in Cambodia. So today she'll be sharing her research to us in a presentation titled Grounding the Green City in Phnom Penh. So before I pass the time to her, just a reminder for all those who are tuning in. So we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so hold your questions till then. But if you would like to send us your questions mid-presentation, you can drop it in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook. Okay, so I'll pass the time to Valerie.
Thank you, Sam. So I will share my screen. Don't hesitate to let me know if you don't see it well, like this. Okay. So I think it's fine. Everyone is able to see it. First of all, I would like to thank Sam, who accepted to be the moderator today, and of course I would like to thank you, the CKS, for organizing this webinar, but also for their precious help during my research in Cambodia, especially during the pandemic time. So today, through the case studies of Phnom Penh, I analyzed the logic of diffusion and reappropriation of the notion of green city at the scale of a small metropolis in Southeast Asia. So in this case, it's Phnom Penh, which is in a rapid urban transformation. And I propose to explore the way in which these notions are diffused and embedded behind the all-encompassing discourse on a neoliberal city. So considering the key role of Singapore in the diffusion of this model at a local level, I demonstrate how their concrete materialization at the local level is done in an incremental way, and mainly at the initiative of some actor that we will detail later on this presentation. And in this sense, the case of Phnom Penh complicates the discourse of the building of the Green City and testify the original modes of participation of a small Asian metropolis in global urban processes. So this presentation is drawn on a doctoral research started 3 years ago at the University of Geneva in Switzerland, where the objective is to understand the deployment, the building, and appropriation of Green City urban model from Singapore to Phnom Penh in Cambodia, but also to Kigali in Africa, in Rwanda especially. So in the literature review on new city models, like for example, you already heard about smart city, green city, sustainable city. So all those literature abounds. But city in the so-called global south, and particularly secondary metropolis, remain poorly covered. Even so, some researchers see an opportunity. For example, in 2018, Shen and Fitriaty said the possibility of sustainable, smarter, and greener city can be achieved in developing Asian countries. But for example, the book Dense plus Green City, as you can see in this picture, published in 2020, with focus on the so-called sustainable and green urban and architectural project. It's a collaboration between ETH Singapore and ETH Zurich in Switzerland, completely ignores the African continent or Middle East. And in the Asian countries, only mention projects located in China or in Singapore. Singapore is often mentioned and presented in this book, but also in other papers, as a laboratory of green or smart urban model. But in what way does Singapore play a key role in the diffusion of this idea of green or smart city model to the global south? So if you arrive in Singapore by the airport, you will receive enlightening signals. The reputation of green city, consolidated since the 1960s, will not be unfounded, and the staging to illustrate it is meticulous. Between green walls and waterfall falling from the sky, welcome to Singapore, from a garden in a city to a city in a garden. The garden city model, first theorized by Ebenezer Award at the end of the 19th century, has strongly influenced the development and dissemination of utopian urban planning thinking, in which contact between city dwellers and nature is central. This garden city model was promoted in the 1960s by the Prime Minister at the time, Lee Kuan-yew, who considered the city-state as a garden city. And this thought has been transformed in the 2000s toward the city in a garden, where this spectacular staging continues in the city in some key places, such as you can see here in the picture, Gardens by the Bay, located in Marina Bay area, where many developments have been taking place following the artificialization and the closure by the sandy embankments of the portion of the bay. Singapore is thus positioned in a world-class city, where the green and smart arguments become a reason for competitiveness and also urban marketing. In this context, the city-state itself proclaiming itself as a model city for sustainable and smart urbanism, but also its peers attribute this model statue to it in Southeast Asia and also beyond. For example, through the ASEAN Smart City Network, launched by Singapore itself in 2018, the city-state is disseminating its knowledge to partner countries, of which Cambodia is a member, along with the city of Battambang, Siem Reap, and of course, Phnom Penh. But this disseminating from the city-state, it's also developing by the technical assistance or consulting services that the city-state exports not only in Asia, but also in other parts of the world, such as the Arabian Peninsula or East Africa. the Singaporean government-owned consulting firm, Surbana Jurong, has been working with the city of Kigali since 2008, for example. And recently, Surbana Jurong won the international tender proposed by the Rwanda capital to develop the 2050 master plan. And all these elements testify to Singapore's major role in the dissemination of new urban development models, including that of the Green City. But how can this Green City be transposed, for example, in Phnom Penh? So the research started in September 2019, and it is divided in 3 chapters. Today, 2 of them will be briefly discussed. So in the first chapter, entitled Pensée, so there is a play on words on it with the A and the E later, which mean at the same time to think, but also to heal. So I introduce in this chapter the research in terms of a social and environmental cost of city productive forces. I analyze the new narratives that have been put in place, including that one of the Green City, and I raise its limits, the limits who are visible or not visible. I try to answer the following question: what is the Green City called? So I did a review, a literature review, and this is the result that I will show you. So in a context where climate change has become defining for the future of cities, and in a context of planetary urbanization, as defined by the French philosopher Henri Lefebvre, but also geographer Brenner and Schmidt, we are invited to analyze the supposed sustainable urban forms and models that are being deployed in a so-called global south, less studied than northern city. So often synonymous with major changes, multiple sustainable city projects under construction or in the planning stage are being implemented in a city of global south, encouraged by the SDGs. As you can see, the 11th one, sustainable cities and communities, they said make city and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So one model in particular tends to be increasingly mobilized in the discourse, the Green City, presented as a virtuous urban model. But what does mean Green City? In the literature, some authors define Green City as similar to sustainable city, to eco-city, to smart city, because they share a preoccupation with sustainable development. But other researchers think each category is unique because they are not interchangeable. But in theory, the concept of Green City has been Western-oriented since 1970s, and applying this lens to other cities is not always suitable. In any case, there is no universal definition. So what does Green City refer to? The polysemy of the concept of Green City and the wide variety of contexts in which it is used make it a much debated notion in the academic field, particularly since 2000. Sorry. Sorry, I just get back from a flu and it's a bit tough sometimes. So sorry for that. So I was saying it's the Green City is a much debated notion in academic fields, and especially since 2000. And in the literature studies, sorry. So in the literature studies, I analyze 3 different approaches. So the first one is the technicist approaches. So this approach focuses on technological progress and sustainability. So in this kind of literature, you could easily read the terms green infrastructure or nature-based solution. And most part of time, this literature consider that with the technological with technology, we will be able to correct the damage caused by past urban choices. The second one is a technological approach, who explain the technical, the cultural, and the social foundation that explore their emergence and diffusion in order to better understand what they cover. And the third one, the critical approaches, it's the main literature that you can read regarding green city. And they say beyond the so-called innovative and virtuous model, the green city multiplies forms of exclusion and reinforce social, spatial, and environmental inequalities. As a result, green cities are often seen as ecological utopias that disguise the logic of the state or the market to take advantage of nature and also further marginalize certain humans. So the critical discourse is becoming dominant in academic circles, reinforcing a deterministic view that in the absence of radical reform, existing political economic structure will doom green city experiments to fade. And the reputation of often similar critics tend to highlight the drawback of green city experiments, especially when dominant discourse obscure to contextualize and differentiate outcomes. But at the end, the model is meaningless unless we look at its actual modes of implementation. As more and more urban areas around the world adopt green and sustainable vision, more and more case studies are being conducted to document how these projects have yet to deliver on their environmental promises. So what does Phnom Penh tell us about what could be a form of sustainable, inclusive, and livable urban future through the green city? So this question, of course, is one of my main questions for my thesis, and this is part of the second chapter of my thesis entitled Produire, which means building. In this chapter, I propose to explore the modalities of anchoring and disseminating this green city concept in Phnom Penh. I mobilize political economy to question the circulation of green city urban models and the emergence or not of new mechanisms associated with its production in order to identify the ways in which this so-called sustainable urban model spread and influence urban dynamics. I pursue the idea that this thesis is a necessary contribution to the understanding for a diversity of urban planning processes in Asia and abroad, far from a preconceived notion of an urban building that will simply copy urban model disseminating from a major metropolis of the first rank as Singapore represents, for example. And I question the way in which green cities are being deployed in Phnom Penh and beyond the hegemonic economic and political model they represent. So Phnom Penh is my main fieldwork of study, and this reflection has been the subject of a forthcoming publication in the journal Espace et Société, an article entitled Fabriquer la ville verte en Asie, la green city de Singapour à Phnom Penh, which means building the green city in Asia, the green city from Singapore to Phnom Penh, co-author with my co-supervisor thesis. So I spent more than 2.5 years in Phnom Penh since 2017. And then in the frame of this research, I mobilized qualitative methods. I conducted more than 50 semi-structured interviews with different stakeholders, from architects to policymakers, to NGO, to artists, etc. And I decided to collect some data using also drawing as an ethnography method. So I will present you some results. The most prominent use of the green city discourse in Phnom Penh is a brand object. Since the day when Phnom Penh was known as the Pearl of Asia in the 70s, the city has traded on its green aesthetic. This continues unabated in a promotional material of private real estate developer. despite the fact that few traces of urban nature remain in most of these projects. For example, one of the interviewees, a developer that I interviewed, we were talking about the green city, and he told me these terms, green city or garden city, are way overused. There are a lot of projects here, garden city, but I see it used in a lot in a marketing, eco living, green living, but I actually don't think that people know what it is. So I asked him, and for you, who spread these terms? And he replied me, I have no idea, but I see a lot of developers sell the marketing. They stick the title eco on it, but what does that mean? What does eco mean? They have bamboo on their project and they call it eco. So as you can see in this picture, so you have, for example, the project of LYP called Garden City. So they just add a garden city behind water park, behind hotel, and also behind golf club. And you have exactly the same with Penghood. It's located in Sparmpov, and they just add the prefix eco, and all the projects start with eco something. So eco veranda, eco melody, eco sunrise, eco delta, eco romance project. So many developers use these words or this narrative regarding green, sustainable. In this sense, the concept of green city, when it's mainly based on private real estate development, leads to a strong commercialization of public spaces, and certainly does not favor the implementation of municipal policy favorable to a creation of totally public green spaces. Because we have to know that in Phnom Penh, urban green space, we can only count 1.1 square meter per capita. WHO recommend 9 square meter per capita. For example, in Bangkok, we are close to 8. So private developers in Phnom Penh know that there is a lack of public urban green space in the capital. So they also develop all these projects. They add the prefix eco or garden city, whatever, but at the end of the day, they're also creating some urban spaces, green spaces. And it's also a strategy, but it's also something that people ask for. And when you buy a house in a Boré Penghood, for example, you will have your house, but you will have also a common or share garden in this area. So in one side, we have the discourse more in a green marketing perspective from the developer perspective. And in the other side, we have also the public authority. So they try to implement it. And the terms green city have mutated in favor of sustainable city, as you can see in this documentation, for example, made with the Global Green Growth Institute, with the help of Ministry of Environment, but also Phnom Penh Capital City Hall. And we see that they are really an interest on it. The green city started to be deployed in Phnom Penh and inspired also by countries like Singapore, for example. But for example, a person from the Ministry of Environment told me that we cannot just apply what Singapore do. We have to adapt the green city or what we want to do in Phnom Penh, in the Phnom Penh context. So these two examples with different actors raise the question of who make the city and the ethics that surround it. If the green city seems from the point of view of developer to be a marketing tool, from the point of view of the public authorities, it could be the basis of guidelines to think in a coherent way about the urban development of the city, which currently lacks of common vision. Nevertheless, the gap between public policies and what is currently happening off the ground remains wide. So we can say that Cambodia is showing a recent but profound interest in deploying a so-called green or smart urban concept. The concrete materialization of this urban model remains limited to private real estate projects for now, but they don't fundamentally challenge the logic of land capture, speculation, or accumulation by dispossession, and I structure the logic of urban development, and they reproduce what was already done since the 2000s. So access to the green city is increasingly reserved for privileged social groups, generating new forms of inequality that are no longer solely driven by differences in access to housing, but also to differences access to cleaner, greener, and more modern environment, which more fundamentally question the capacity of the green and technological city to respond to the challenge raised by social and environmental injustice. So following the footsteps of the French philosopher Henri Lefebvre, I believe it's necessary to reflect on the right to the green city, which have not yet been studied in Asian context and in secondary cities, in order to consider the future inhabitation of Phnom Penh. And with one of my colleagues, Laura Beckwith, we are currently working on a paper on environmental injustice in Phnom Penh regarding it. So more I spend time on fieldwork, studying green city, and more I was integrated by another aspect of it, and especially the materiality of the city. Because now we are talking a lot about carbon footprint, climate change, and all. So it was a necessity to me to understand how few of the green city in Phnom Penh, the private one, as we can see, for example, in Borek Pengut, are made by. So I decided to analyze the green city by its materiality, which is rarely the case, and with one material in particular, a grain of sand. So I had approaching then a socio-material geography of sand, as one author, John, proposed in 2021. So it was a moving process in time and space to appreciate the changes in state of a grain of sand as it travels on the dry land out of the water, doing which I crisscrossed the capital and its outskirts with my translator and Cambodian friends, following in the footsteps of the human and non-human actor who gravitated around the grain of sand as it put out works. So I was greatly inspired by the work that followed the thing. And this work, however, stands up on its methodological approach, so using drawing ethnography. And the drawing that accompany this writing take on a political dimension. So I will present you some of my drawing. So maybe it's going to be a bit too small to read it. So maybe you should not try to read it because the character or the font is really small. So while the Ministry of Environment adopts sustainable development plans for the city of Phnom Penh, speculative real estate development continue through lakes embankments. According to a report published in 2019 by the NGO STT, of the 26 lakes existing in Phnom Penh in 1990, 16 have been filled in since that time, and 10 are partially filled in. So these lakes fills raise question about ecological issue, since ecosystems are destroyed on the one end, but on the other end, the filling of the lake endangered the inhabitants of the city of Phnom Penh because these lakes, sometimes more than 2,000 hectares for some, serve as a real reservoir during the rainy season and the strong floods of the Mekong, thus naturally protecting the inhabitants from floods. So here you have the filling in progress in Beng Cheng Eng in the south of the city. But here it's another example in Beng Rechai in the northeast part of the city, close to Grand Phnom Penh International Project, to the Gulf Coast. Here it's the filling in progress in Beng Tamok, in the north part of Phnom Penh. And all those fillings are made possible with one material, a grain of sand. After water, sand represents in 2021 the second most consumed natural resources on the planet, about 50 billion tons of aggregate extracted each year. Until now, invisible or unrecognized, synonymous with low-value materials, sand is nonetheless an essential actor in capitalistic production and productivism. Widely mobilized for the urban factory, and especially to make concrete with nearly 30 billion tons of aggregates. It is also solicited for filling, especially in the case of Phnom Penh, or embankments, but also for the creation of glass. And in its form of silica, it is used also for the receipt of cosmetic, for example. So this success, as it made it a community, which has a use value, but also an exchange value. And the flip side of this triumph is that sand, this invisible ubiquitous in our daily lives, now tends to become a scarce materials. In Phnom Penh, the sand has already made a long spatio-temporal journey. In order to retrace it, it is important to make changes of scale in the notion of times, because there are two distinct temporalities that are being considered in the formation of the sand. The first one is related to the geological timescale. So it took billions of years. So the sand is created by the successive erosion. And the second times is it's the transport of the sediment. So it means the sediments are already present on the Mekong River, for example, and from Kratie to Phnom Penh, it will take maybe a year or several months for the sands to travel from Kratie with to Phnom Penh with the water. So in the logic of urban production, the sand in the Mekong River looks perfect, while the sand in the Sahara Desert does not, because it doesn't not look right. Because it is eroded by wind rather than water, and it's too smooth or rounded to come together and to form a stable concrete that will cling to its support. So also the appearance, it's the same, but at the end, we cannot do the same with this sand. So the use can vary. And to make a quality concrete, the need for right proportion and material goes hand in hand. Since a grain of sand and its proportion are important in the chemical composition of the materials to unite the element, we can see the sand as a binder. And in a perspective that supports a socio-economic system based on the exploitation of natural resources and the exponential increase in production, Cambodia will have this advantage of being naturally blessed by its geology, since the subsoil composed of alluvial deposits are very rich in sand and high quality of sand especially. And from this abundance arise the drifts raised by thinkers advocating a critical perspective on development and environment, thus related to intensive extraction or extractivism. In this research, extractivism is understood in Anna Bennick's sense. She defined it in 2015 like the massive and destructive exploitation of nature, any activity that removes at a rate and in a volume that presents even so-called renewable resources from renewing themselves. In Cambodia, there are three different types of sand who are extracted. So the first one we already mentioned is the river sand. So mostly used for the local demand, for example, for cement factory, but also for landfill. And most part of time it's for the real estate sector, and especially the speculative real estate sector. The second one is the ocean sand, mostly used for exportation. For example, we were mentioning Singapore at the beginning of this presentation. So this ocean sand is used for the reclamation land in Singapore. And the third one is the silica sand, mostly for the exportation too. And it is used, for example, for industries or, for example, glass or electronics, and mainly in Taiwan, for example. So in its materials perspective, sand brings into play a political, economic, social, and environmental tensions. It illustrates part of the materiality and also the energy flows essential to the modern urban fabric operated by the city in connection with its environment and other human society. So what I decided to do, because in other parts, the urban metabolism, particularly in Phnom Penh, but not only, so the urban metabolism is defined by Barnes in 2017 as a set of processes by which cities import, consume, transform, store, and export energy and materials. And I think this urban metabolism can be analyzed qualitatively through the prism of a grain of sand. So I propose to try two distinct itineraries of a grain of sand evolving in the Mekong riverbed in Cambodia. A part named here bifurcates. So the first bifurcation is putting to work the living account of an observed and study reality. So this is a study based on what I've seen. So the sand is extracted from its bed, here the Mekong, and contributes to the making of a modern city, the green city. And the grain of sand, by default, abandons the past to continue in its environment. It is deviated from its initial direction and follow new assignments and orientation. And the notion of urban metabolism is then inserted in a critical perspective. So Mekong River sand in the survey study area is extracted in 4 different ways. 3 of them are transiting through sand depots. And this method were all identified through direct observation. So the first extraction techniques is carried out using a cable shovel equipped with a grab bucket with a capacity of 2 cubic square meter and installed on the barge at anchor. So this is the number 1. And the second one is a technique operated by a barge. So without the intervention of additional barge, a motor and the pumping pipes are directly installed on the barge. A section of pipes dives into the water and sucks up the sand from the bottom of the bed with the help of a motor and pours it through this same pipe directly into the storage area on the barge. A third way of extracting sand from the Mekong River is by means of what we will call in this research barge machine. So often docked on the banks of the river, these barge machines are connected by a system of pipes to a sand depot. And they pump the sand directly from the river, and they can also be used as a relay for barge arriving full of sand to transfer the sand from the barge to the depot. And the last techniques deploy, for example, actually in Beng Cheng in south part of Phnom Penh. So is without transiting by a sand depot. This is a pipes connected, interlocking each other, and they are directly taking the sand from the river, transiting by a barge machine, and then arriving, for example, here to the lake, and they are filling the lake like this. So it's a bit similar of the third technical developable. So from a depot to a construction site, after I decided to follow a grain of sand following the trucks. Because the first trip of a grain of sand makes over land, it's often in a bucket at the back of the truck, and unless it travels directly through the pipe. So at the depot, several trucks follow each other, sometimes in a chain. And like this, it's possible to see where the sand goes and for what it is used for. And I propose later on a second bifurcation to go further in this approach by leaving the theoretical frameworks to relay via hypothetical deductive approaches, to refuse to put the living to work. And I suppose a speculative narrative toward the consolidation of the terrestrial becoming again with the sand and maintain itself in its habitat. So we imagine we leave the sand in the riverbeds. So the second bifurcation continued the reflection of a cosmology of the link to be consolidated outside the hegemony embodied by the Western capitalist societies on which we will think, and I propose to imagine what would be a green city if sand continue its journey in a riverbed toward the Mekong Delta. So this vision allows us to question the real meaning of the life of the sand, invisible and living hero, beyond a world shaped by the extractivism economy. Otherness to the materialistic and critical urban metabolism where an imaginary unfold. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, because when we study the green city in Phnom Penh, we also need to have a look on the materiality of green city. And when we go deeper, maybe we will see some interesting things. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and sorry again for my voice today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for your very interesting presentation and also for the visualization of your findings. I think it was very useful and very interesting as opposed to seeing a wall of text, right? It really brings across your findings. And so maybe as chair's privilege, I have a less of a research question to ask you, right? But really one from a researcher point of view. What was your inspiration and what was your motivation to embark on this topic, right? And also why do this topic in Phnom Penh of all cities?
Actually, so as you mentioned in the presentation, when I arrived the first time in Cambodia, I was working for Paris City in the frame of a decentralized cooperation. And actually, we published a book called Phnom Penh Extension et Mutation. And this book was related to the project to the ING project. Actually, we are currently developing in south part of the city in Bang Champun and Benchengek lakes. And of course, working on it, I was really interesting to pursue this reflection regarding especially ecological question, which we didn't have time to explore in a long way. So that's why I decided to do also a PhD at the end of this decentralized cooperation.
Okay, yeah, and so maybe you could share with us before we go into the questions that we have consolidated from Facebook and also from the Q&A in Zoom. Maybe you can share from your experience, right? Not only in the fieldwork, the most recent one, but also in your previous stint before you started on your PhD, right? What do you think would be some of the key elements that would be needed to bring Phnom Penh to become truly an inclusive and also a green city, right, in your opinion?
That's a good question. So as I mentioned, the results show that there is a real interest to develop the green city, or sustainable city or smart city. And now it's maybe only the private developers, even if policy are going in this way, but definitely what is missing is coordination, a common vision, and probably, for example, everyone knows there is a master plan in Phnom Penh, but when you look at it, when you look what is happening on the ground, there is a huge gap between the master plan and what is currently happening on the ground. So strong policy, definitely, but also applying the law. And probably some, not only developers, but some people in Cambodia are maybe up to the law, and yeah, they just don't see in the perspective as for a long way. They don't consider that they will give or yeah, for example, we say our generation should give to the next generation. So we need to think for the next generation, and urban planning basically is doing this. We are not doing profit, short-term profit, but maybe in Cambodia right now, the meaning is, okay, what I can do to do a short-term profit, and they don't see that for the next generation. This is my point of view.
Yeah, I think you brought up some interesting point in your response to that, and also your observation, right? And even my trips to Phnom Penh, I realized, a lot of the developments have eco or green or something of that permutation, right, within the name, whether it's greenwashing, if we can call it. But it does show that, as a rapidly developing country and also a rapidly developing city in itself, Phnom Penh, right? There are tensions between the different needs or the different aspirations. So on one end, we aspire to be green, sustainable. You have your sustainable development goals. But on the other end, you have people who want social mobility, people who want a better life, people who want to live in different sort of houses, driving different sort of vehicles. So I think there is this tension, right, to balance between all of these different aspirations. So do you have any comments on that or any insights on how we might balance it out?
No, sure, you're right, but the fact is that in the 1960s, Phnom Penh was called the Pearl of Asia, and it was an example in Southeast Asia. For example, the Prime Minister of Singapore at the time traveled to Phnom Penh to see how Phnom Penh was beautiful, green, etc. So it was a model at the time in the 60s. And of course, there were a lot of trouble by the history and okay, but since the 2000s, there were political choices were made, and it's obvious that these choices were made not for the common goods, but only for a few people, and these people getting richer and richer. Okay, but at the end of the day, this is not an inclusive city that we are making in Phnom Penh right now, and we can see it. For example, in this borough that I mentioned, the price of a house are ridiculous expensive, and who can afford it right now? So this gap between the rich guys in the country and the poorest one is really huge, and I think it's becoming it's increasing. This gap is increasing. This is a problem right now. So it's only political choices when you're doing urban planning, and maybe it's not too late. I hope it's not too late, but we will see. The future will tell us if it's too late or not. But definitely, Phnom Penh is still a small city and can still continue to develop in a way to improve the water, electricity supply, of course, but it doesn't mean we cannot think about the public spaces, the pavement and sidewalks and all those things. It's not two different things. It's called urban planning, but there's no urban planning. And the RUPP just opened a new courses regarding urban planning. So we hope also that this new formation will also raise a new way of thinking, and it's not only engineer or architect who have to design the city, but maybe also citizen and urban planner, and so more people around the table too.
Yeah, and so one of the common strategy, right, if you're talking about green city, and then your example of Singapore, garden city, city in a garden. And now our latest iteration is called City in Nature. So it's like the city doesn't belong to us; it belongs to nature. We just happen to be a city within this context, right? And so we have a couple of questions on the Q&A, and they're all related to parks, right? And parks in relation with the green city. Maybe we could explore this topic further, because it's a really common intervention, right? Or a common move to introduce more green space within it. So maybe we take the first question from Daniel. How do parks in Phnom Penh fit into your analysis of green city? So your research that was just presented suggests that private real estate projects generate new forms of inequality in Phnom Penh, but can parks act in a way to break down these inequalities with future development?
That's a good question. But actually, parks in Phnom Penh, public parks, if we're talking about it, Daniel, I don't know if you precise it, but this is what I mentioned. when I was talking about the private developer, because of course private developers are developing all those green city projects. They know there is a lack of public green spaces in Phnom Penh, and I think I was interesting a bit, but there is a colleague called Yen Yat who already works a lot on public urban green space in Phnom Penh, and he highlighted the fact that this lack of park also contributes to maybe because if you look, for example, Phnom Penh, you will see only in the city center historical park, so the main four Can Phnom Penh, etc. You will see the park are mainly located into this area. But at the end, if you look in a broader Phnom Penh, in the peripheral area, you will never see a lot of urban public green spaces. But of course, if you look inside a private project, and we consider that, for example, if you go in the Boré, Peng Ut, in Sparampov, and you can get in and you arrive close to Big Ben or close to the Eiffel Tower, of course, this is also green spaces, but it's private green spaces. So I think it's super difficult right now because the municipality don't have a lot of land, and the fact that most part of land they just maybe sell it, or they are not able to keep lands to develop green spaces, because the price of the lands is really high right now, and most part of people, they just want to do profit. But what we can suggest and we can encourage is maybe do some transition parks. For example, Odom Parks is a good example. It's a private developer who plan to do condominium in the next few years, but waiting this project arrive is creating this little pop-up garden, and everyone knows Odom Garden in Phnom Penh. I mean, not everyone maybe, but a lot of people. So we can also suggest that the land will not get built can be this pop-up garden. So this is also sometimes we need more talk between developers, policy, but also private architects or people who have idea to develop this notion of parks and what is parks, or even the riverbank. I mean, it's a public space for me, and it works pretty well. You can see during nighttime it's full of people, so it's worked pretty well. I hope I answered the question.
Louis has a suggestion, a question to you also, combined together. It says, do you think if more land is owned by the public authorities, there will be more parks? And what link should there be made between parks and the land policy within Phnom Penh?
Yeah, basically, that's an interesting question, because all the lakes I show you that are being filled in right now, they used to be public land. So the lakes in Phnom Penh were all public at the time, and doing fill-in embankments, it means it become private land. So it means the few lands that used to be public in Phnom Penh, the government changing this land statute for the private. So definitely there is a lack of public land, but it's also the way of how the government, and I'm not talking about Phnom Penh municipality, because I think it's higher, it's the higher level who decide in this case of lakes. But for example, how the lakes in the north, because we hear that Beng Tamok in the north, they will keep I don't know how many hectares to develop a park or whatever. So it's a good initiative. But we could also imagine that a lake, it's already a public, not park, but as we can see in other cities in Asia, for example, in Vietnam, in Hanoi, they keep a lot of lakes and they are creating urban public spaces that surrounding it. So of course, it's a lot of maybe money, but I think it's not the question. It's not a question of money. It's a question of what we want to do with the commons good that we still have in this city. So yeah, probably there still needs a
And I think building on the response that you gave for the last two questions and your example of the Oldham Gardens, right? I know there'll be a new condominium that will be built in Oldham Gardens. The garden there is actually pretty nice. It's a very good public space, and you see a lot of activities there. So one thing that in Singapore and in other cities, this have been put in place in terms of a policy is, replacing the green cover that these buildings are taking over by a certain percentage, right? Could be 3 times or 4 times, and maybe legislating, for example, to have X amount of public space within the private development. Do you think that might be something that could, take place, as a lot of all these private developments are taking place in Phnom Penh? Hillary, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was saying I didn't hear well the one part of your question. Sorry.
Yeah. So do you think it's possible in like new developments, right, to just legislate and say a percentage of it should be replacing the green space or the blue space that they've taken over, and just replacing it at an even higher rate, like maybe 200-300%?
That's a tricky question. I don't know to answer to that, because you see, for example, in the project, basically Bawray Penghut, they are developing all those green spaces, but at the end of the day, they are filling lakes to create their project. So yeah,
so difficult.
Definitely.
We have another question on Zoom, right? By Dolphy. So what precautions would you suggest that one could take to ensure that these public green spaces in Phnom Penh do not become spaces for illicit activities?
I think there is a lot to do in terms of what can, for example, the municipality can do at its level. Of course, the municipality cannot solve all the problem, but just if we are thinking, or I don't know, maybe they're going to revise the master plan for the next few years, and what will be a good initiative? Just if we imagine a new master plan, just applying the master plan and not just put it in the back of the office and never seen it again. So it means there need a lot of people on the field who are checking what private developers are doing, and also make sure that people who are giving authorization, like I don't know, at Songkat level or Can level, are not by developer, or so it's also a lot of corruption aspect that they need to check. And of course, if we want that these tools as the master plan is effective or can be for everyone, they need a strong policy to frame it, but also after, when it's done, they need to check it on the ground. And they already start with for example, the environmental impact assessment. The ministerial environment I have already trying to develop this. But even if each developer has to do an environmental impact assessment, at the end, the Ministry of Environment is not able today to check all these environmental impact assessment, because there is a missing of human resources, and even on the ground there are missing, and it goes too fast, so they cannot check all projects as careful as they should do. So it's also this problem is going too fast.
And also, second part of the question was also focusing on how do we ensure that this, investment or this changes actually enhance the lived experience within Phnom Penh, the livability, right? And I suppose it's not just another vanity project to label eco something in front of the garden to have it there. Yeah, I think we have a response from Louis. And she's asking a follow-up question, whether international corporations could, cooperation with international bodies or agencies, in this case, would have a role to play in green city policies in Phnom Penh and probably also to the wider Cambodia.
It's a tricky question, because I was part of this decentralized corporation, and I see what we recommend and what was done or was not done. So of course, decentralized corporation is a good thing, and there are a lot of decentralized corporation, German one or French one or whatever. But at the end, I think sometimes we can, for example, with the city of Paris, when we did this report and this book, so we were proposing recommendation. We were thinking, okay, if you plan to develop this part of the city, you might be careful on this part, and this aspect, etc. And at the end, I think nothing was followed. So we cannot. I mean, the people who are currently governing could not say that they didn't know, because it was right on the book or it was right on the report. But at the end, I was just thinking, okay, it's good to have a decentralized cooperation, but we can imagine that all this also cooperation are working together, because, for example, we were not in connection with German people when I was in the city hall. And I didn't know that Germans were also working on this topic, for example. So there is also a miscommunication between different stakeholders who are arriving from different cities, but also there are different interests, because of course with the French cooperation we arrive with a few amounts of money, but at the end, if we compare with the Japanese, it's not at all the same, and there are different interests also behind all this decentralized cooperation. And if there's a role to play, probably there is a role to play. But at the end, it's not Paris City who's going to decide for Phnom Penh City. So, I mean, the important thing is how Cambodian and even how Cambodian citizens feel regarding it, and how they feel regarding the changing of their city.
Okay, thanks. So we've covered a lot about Phnom Penh itself, but maybe it's time to go a bit more macro, slightly out of the just Phnom Penh itself, but based on your findings and the insights that you've gathered, right, over the years of working this topic. Do you think there are any transferable findings or recommendations or strategies that could be applied to other cities within Cambodia itself, like Siem Reap or Battambang? And that's the question that's posed on Facebook by Sofan, on whether these strategies can be applied in other areas in other provinces in Cambodia to enable them to become a green and smart city also.
Yeah, actually, I think because I didn't mention it in my presentation today, but I also analyzed, because as you've seen this morning, it was more at the top-down level. But I also been on the field, and I also spent times with, as we call, bottom initiatives. So I spent times with people who were doing gardening or composting, and I think there is also not only this green city as a neoliberal tools, and there is also a green city from the bottom, from the roots, and that's why I think there is no one green city in Phnom Penh, but there are several green cities. And if you go basically in a beret, New World, for example, you will see there's a lot of plants or kitchens, herbs everywhere. So I know it's just vegetation, and it's not only part of the green city, it's more than that, but it's already a step. And if we combine this, and if we look all those roots initiative, at the end we will see also another way to build or to think the green city. And I'm not sure Phnom Penh is now at the stage that it will maybe export the idea to other countries. But what I can see is, for example, in Africa, because I also study Kigali in Rwanda, and basically the story, it's quite the same. They also been through a genocide in the 1919, and it was really tough for them for the reconstruction of the city. But the way how they are rebuilding themselves, it's really impressive. But I know it's maybe an exception in Africa. But we also need to take care, or to look after this also good example or good practices, and how we can spread our experts travel from a place to another place to have a look, and how does it works to implement in your own country at the local context, or they organize, or there is a hybridity of this model, or more than that. So yeah, there are definitely many things to have a look. It's just the beginning.
So building on, you're bringing up other examples of other cities, right? Apart from Singapore, which you brought up at the start of your presentation, are there any other cities in which you think could be models of how a green city could be approached?
Yeah, I didn't hear sorry.
So do you have another example of a green city in which we could look towards and to learn how they have done it in this journey?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think Kigali for me right now in Rwanda is also could be a good model. And I don't know in which way it could inspire Phnom Penh, because of course the contexts are really, really different, and also in terms of cultural and social aspect. But it's also interesting to look what is happening right now in the African continent, and not only be focused on what is happening in Asian continent, even if you are an Asian country. It's also interesting to go abroad and to have a look.
Okay, one last question. This is like customary, right? You got to ask this question out of all the researchers, right? What's your next step? You've shared with us a lot of your fieldwork and findings. So what's next for you?
yeah, the next for me, you know, we say in French, a good thesis is a thesis when it's done, you know. So I will try to finish my thesis, and I will try to finish the writing of it. So I'm in this process and after I will see. Of course, I would like to continue working in Phnom Penh context because I think it's really interesting, and there are many things to think of it, and there are many people who are interesting to collaborate in, and yeah, definitely it's a nourishing city.
Yes, that's great. And now you're the final last stretch to get it published, finished. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for your sharing this afternoon. Now maybe I'll hand the time back to somebody.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you so much, Dolores. And for sure, I would like to thank to all the participants who joined us today that brought up a lot of interesting questions, and those questions really make the presentation dive in even deeper into the issue as well. And thank you so much for everyone who stayed with us on Zoom and also on Facebook Live since the beginning as on now, and for spending your morning, your afternoon, and your evening with us today. And of course, taking this opportunity, I would like to also inform you that on 27 January, we will have another webinar, which I share the link into our chat. The topic going to be on juggling between modernity and the spirit of the foreign microfinance and land in highland of Cambodia, be presented by our Cambodian dissertation research fellow as well. So I hope to see you all again on the coming next webinar. And for sure, I would like to also inform all of you that our Khmer Language and Culture program and Junior Resident Fellow program are now open for application until 31st March 2023. If you would like to know more about the program, please do not forget to check our website. So for those who have not subscribed or follow CKS social media, please subscribe to our site or social media like Facebook page, YouTube, Instagram for instant update of our program and also our event. So last but not least, thank you our moderator, Dr. Samuel Jong, and our speaker, Dolores Bertre, and our audience who stayed with us together today. And may you have a wonderful day, evening, and see you next time. Thank you so much.